Welcome to the Return on Lifestyle podcast with Rey Descalso from Privada Wealth Management. In this podcast, we help you overcome financial worries and make sense of planning, investing, insurance, and banking. Join us for this journey as Rey draws from his expertise and interviews brilliant minds to help you enjoy life. The best is yet to come.
Hello and welcome to Return on Lifestyle with Rey Descalso from Privada Wealth Management. Today we're going to be talking about 401k, pro tips, and pitfalls. What's going on, Rey?
Hey, I am doing fantastic here in beautiful sunny Florida. How about you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. You know, when I was looking over these notes, first thing that I thought of was my Atari 5200. My favorite game was Pitfall, but it drove me nuts. Oh, just because there was no save back then. There was no continue my game later back then. It was you either play the whole thing and get through it, or Mom makes you go to bed, you know, and then you have to start all over in the next morning. Oh, anyway, I hate pitfalls. Anyway, so
good point. Good point. You know, and that's kind of how life is. You know, there's no save button. You get one shot. So probably a very appropriate introduction, sir. Well done.
Oh, well, thank you, great. The music is playing in my head right now, but I'll listen to you as well. So
good.
What are we talking about? How do we start this podcast today?
Yeah, so today I wanted to discuss a few great ideas to maximize your workplace retirement. And that could be a 401k, a 403b, you know, all the different numbers. Could be a simple IRA or a SEP IRA. Really, a simple IRA is more like a 401k, and a SEP IRA is a completely different animal. If you've got questions, by the way, and you're listening to this podcast about what you have at your particular work, feel free to reach out. You can click the contact button, privadawealth.com, and we're more than happy to get you up to speed on all the different bells and whistles. And also, too, as we're talking about 401ks, we're going to be talking in general. Your 401k, your 457 at work, your situation is going to be different from one person to the next, both in what you can invest in and also to some of the rules and the guidelines. Very complicated 401ks, but everybody thinks they're kind of, set it and forget it. So I want to talk today about how to maximize your 401k and also how to avoid mistakes. So pro tips, which is positive, and pitfalls, the negative things that we need to avoid.
All right, let's get started.
You bet. Let's start with pro tips. You know, the good news first kind of thing. Mm-hmm. One of the things I wanted to talk about is on a pro tip when it comes to your 401k is participate. Now that doesn't sound real. That's not rocket science, but I got to thinking about it over the last couple of weeks, and I wrote a while back ago. I wrote a blog where I talked about the financial path of Mr. Burns versus Homer Simpson. Now, you probably haven't watched a lot of Simpsons you seem like a more sophisticated person than a Simpsons watcher. But have you ever seen the episode of one or two episodes of The Simpsons?
Oh, yeah. I used to love The Simpsons.
Yeah, okay, good.
I'm not that sophisticated, Ray.
I held you in too high esteem.
Yes,
okay,
you did.
Good. Yeah, me too. It's probably one of the most intelligently written and funniest and insightful, quite frankly, TV shows ever. A cartoon, albeit, but it's fantastic. And if you know Mr. Burns, he always puts his fingers together and he goes, excellent. And he is the stereotypical wealthy, evil, boss of the nuclear factory. And of course, Homer Simpson is the, D+ student who's just thinking about eating donuts and going to clown college. Anyways, the blog that I wrote on that really delves deep into the two tracks, that people take, and they're extreme, obviously. One of the things about Mr. Burns is he has lots of employees, lots of people working for him, right? Mm-hmm. And one thing about Homer Simpson, so for Mr. Burns, his wealth comes from the fact that he has a company, and that company, people are working for him 24 hours a day. And, of course, he has Mr. Smithers, who is his sycophant, who just thinks he walks on water. Yep. And he also has a button where he can release the hounds. My favorite thing is when he says, release the hounds. And I always say that whenever people ring the doorbell and my Maltese, about maybe 4 pounds soaking wet, starts barking, I always say, release the hounds.
Oh, yeah.
So Mr. Burns has people working for him. Homer Simpson, to make money, he trades time for money, right?
Yes.
So he clocks in. He works, and then as soon as he can get off, he gets off and sits on his couch, or he goes to the bar and sits next to drinking Duff beer. And they got this whole lifestyle, and it's really a great cartoon because that's really the two choices that you and I have. Now, Now, for Mr. Burns, he started a business and has workers working for him. A 401k, what you're doing, and this is key, is you are taking your income and you're turning your income into assets a little bit at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And the reasons that's important is oftentimes what we'll do is we'll take that $1, and we'll put it into our 401k and say, well, what's the big deal? But what you've got now is you've got a worker. You've got you've got something that is working for you.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never get rich. You'll never get financially secure based upon your income. Your income can go away at any time based upon health, based upon the economy, based upon, how hard you can work and how much time you have. So if we can transition, and in the blog I talk about how Mr. Burns really doesn't worry about income anymore because he has so many assets. And we have an asset appreciating. The stock market has gone up. The real estate market has gone up. How have wages worked out for Homer Simpson over the last 30 years? Wages are the same to down if you look at inflation. So we know that we're living in an asset-based economy. So transitioning from wages to assets, from income to assets is the key. So your 401k is one ticket out of the Homer Simpson rat race. And I really want to just drive that home, because if you can get that income, keep it for yourself, put it away into your 401k and not chase consumerism, not chase the shiny donut or that next beer if you're Homer Simpson, then what you're doing for yourself is you're getting out of the rat race and you're getting onto that next level of capitalism, which is turning your income into assets that work for you. And that's, I want to drive that home. That's the key. If you can do that, if you can participate in your 401k, you've taken the first pro tip, and I want to make sure I drive that home.
Great. All right. So you've got that first tip down. Where do we go from here?
Well, the other thing I would do is make sure you get educated on your particular 401k, because you want to make sure you get at least the match. Okay. So there are lots of different schematics, if you will, for how a 401k can match the participant. All right. The government does not require that your business even have a match. So you may not have a match, right? But if you have one, you got to make sure you know what it is and make sure that you're getting it up to the very max, at least. If you can do more, fantastic, because obviously we want to get off that rat race. So let me give you a typical, what we call a safe harbor match. Safe harbor match is usually done by small businesses where the owner makes a lot of money and he's got quite a few rank and file employees that don't make quite as much. Well, the government says if you are, in this case, Mr. Burns, making $100,000 or $150,000, and most of your employees are making $25,000, you cannot participate if they don't participate. So they may not participate, and if they don't participate, the business owner gets no benefit. So what we do is we have something called safe harbor, and that is where the owner guarantees that he will have at least 3%. A match. So if I put in 3% of my salary, my employer will match that first 3%. And then if I put in another 2, he'll give me another 1. So if I put in 5%, I get 4%. Now, the reason that's key, and the reason I even mentioned safe harbor, is because I see them quite a bit with small businesses. Yours may be different. Some large companies here in town, they have 7 and 9% matches, very generous, and quite frankly, some have none. But the reason I mention this is because I want you to think about it. Just imagine you have a 3% match. In other words, you put in 3% of your salary and your employer matches it at 100%. You put in 3, they give you 3. Where else can you get this rate of return? Now, I want you to put on your thinking caps, get your calculators out. If I put in $3 and that very same day my employer matches it with $3, what rate of return is that on my initial $3?
100%, baby.
That's exactly right.
Love that.
We have a winner. We have a winner here in front. Thank you, Eric. That's right. And so when people talk about their 401ks and about the stock market, it's great to get a nice rate of return. But when you talk about a match, you're talking about, in the safe harbor analogy, 100% return on that initial 3%. So think about it for a second. If you're not doing that, you're giving up free money. And the fact is that it piles up so quickly. We have a safe harbor 401k here for our employees at Privada Wealth Management. And I'm amazed at how fast it grows, simply because you put in that 5%, and you get 4%. And I'm proud. I'm proud of the fact that we have that, and I'm excited to see it. To see my employees participate, and quite frankly, myself, because that safe harbor provides it there for me. So, one other pro tip I want you to consider is using the Roth feature on your 401k. So, check with your human resource department, check with your 401k provider, and find out, do you have a Roth feature? And the reason this is important is because a lot of folks don't know they've got a Roth feature. And what is a Roth feature? Well, back up. You all know about traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs. A traditional IRA is where you don't pay taxes now, but you will, and you grow it tax-free, and then you pay taxes when you take money out. A Roth is the reverse. You pay taxes now, let it ride, and you never pay taxes again on the growth and the principal. Well, 401ks now oftentimes have a Roth feature, and folks aren't participating in that. I think I've talked about it before. I've got some blogs on the website as well explaining that my goal for my clients would be for them to be at 50-50 when they retire. 50% of their assets in a Roth IRA or Roth 401k, and 50% of their assets in a traditional. And the rationale for that is very simple. We don't know what kind of tax environment you will retire into.
True.
Right? All we know is that a Roth IRA hurts right now because you're like, I got to pay taxes on this money rather than take the full write-off. And so your CPA may be mad at me if we talk and we decide to go for that 50-50 split because he wants you to get that tax break now. But we've also seen that when you get into retirement, if you have got a nice bucket of Roth money that spends tax-free, it can really be very helpful when it comes to your real withdrawal rates and how much you're actually keeping. And we don't know. We don't know what the future will hold for you when it comes to tax rates. So having a Roth, but the problem is most people don't realize they have a Roth feature at work. And a lot of these things are really all about getting yourself educated, calling your HR department, talking to your boss, or even calling the 1-800 number on your statements. Mm-hmm. So my pro tip then would be to get a hold of those folks and use your Roth. If you don't have a Roth feature on your 401k, you need to talk to your boss and your HR department, and you need to demand it. And I'll tell you why. It is basically standard operating procedure now on Roth, on 401k chassis, if you will, providers. If you have an older company or an older 401k that's not being serviced by an advisor, that's not being taken care of, this is actually a weak spot for your boss. Your boss needs to know, hey, this is not a good idea. And if you are a boss, if you have a 401k, and you don't know if you have a Roth feature on your 401k or not, give us a call. We'd like to help you out because we want to make sure that you realize that it's not an additional cost. It's something that is kind of like computers today. You know, you're not paying more for a USB port. It's just standard, you know. And so we need to make sure that you're getting those upgrades. And if you have any questions, give us a call. We'll point you in the right direction, and we will make sure that you understand. Now, a couple things about the Roth that you need to be aware of. I already mentioned one thing, and that is that you're going to pay taxes. So if you're putting $100 away and 50 is going to go into your traditional 401k contribution and 50% is going into your Roth contribution, well, remember, you're paying taxes on that other 50, okay? So that's gonna look a little different on your paycheck. And the second thing is that $100, all of it's going to get matched. So if that $100 is going to get matched, that's great. But where is the match going to go? Is it going to go into a Roth account or is it going to go into a traditional account? The answer is it always goes into a traditional type account. In other words, your match can never be a Roth type match. You're not going to be taxed on that money. So when you look at doing your allocations, remember that your match will always be traditional, and your contributions can be either traditional or Roth, but the match will always be a tax deferred investment that you will pay taxes when you take it out.
It sounds like you've answered the two questions I was about to bring up, and I just want to still ask those just to see if they were covered completely. First of all, can you do like you said, they look into it and they have a Roth option? Can you split what your contributions are going to? You can do at that point 50% traditional, 50% Roth within your 401k?
That's exactly right. Okay. Yeah, you don't have to choose one or the other. You can blend it, and you can do whatever you like to do. So in the safe harbor situation where I'm going to put 3% away, right? I could put 3%, 100% of that. My 3%, my employee contribution could go into Roth. Mm-hmm. Where is the other 3% going to be put?
Yeah, it goes.
the employer match would be traditional. And I can do any variation thereof, but the employer match will always be in the tax-deferred traditional.
All right. And so then the next question, it sounds like you're answering this one as well. If they're calling about it now, they set it up 5 years ago, can they just switch it at this point?
No, who's calling me? The participant?
Sorry, the participant. Yeah, the participant calls in and says, I found out there's a Roth feature on this, or they call in and they ask the question. They say, yes, there is a Roth feature. Can they then just switch it, or do they have to wait till a certain time of the year, or is it just?
That's a great question. So in the olden days, say 20 years ago, there would be a once or twice a year opportunity to make changes. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, typically what I see is that you can make changes to your contributions to your 401k, both the investment types and also the amount you invest, and whether it's Roth or traditional, every pay period. Okay.
Got it.
So there's a really good chance that you'll have the opportunity to make those changes. Again, give us a ring and let us walk you through it. A lot of what we're talking about here is a case-by-case basis. Mm-hmm. But what we see more and more is the standard. And remember, these type of investments are being looked at by the Department of Labor. So the Department of Labor wants to make sure that there are lowest common denominators. And the industry, the 401k industry, has done a great job of being competitive. And so if company A provides a Roth feature and it costs no more money, well, guess what? Companies B, C, and D, they have to follow suit pretty quickly or be left in the dust.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing lots and lots of companies roll these things out very quickly. And if you don't have those type of things, it's probably simply just a matter of lack of advice to your business owners and to your HR departments.
Got it. All right. Any more pro tips today?
No more pro tips. I think that's enough. If you get those three things going, you'll be doing pretty well.
Nice.
So let's transition over to your favorite video game in mine, Pitfalls.
All right.
Here are three things that I want you to think about that are bad, that are to be avoided, or at least to really be seriously considered. And again, this is all my opinion. Don't take my word for it. Give me a ring and we can talk about your particular situations. But one of the things I want to put a red flag up and I want you to be aware of are the type of investment choices that you have. One of the types of investment choices that you have in your 401k or 403b, and they're very, very popular. They're called target date funds. So target date fund, let me tell you what they are. A target date fund is a fund that is based upon your age or based upon the age you will be when you are retiring at, say, 65. Okay. So if you are right now 40 years old, you'll probably be in 45 years old, you'll be in a 2040 fund. And as you get older, okay, your fund will go from equities more and more and more as you get closer to 65, more and more towards a more fixed income portfolio, right? Mm-hmm. And these target date funds were devised because what they were finding is that 25-year-olds were putting money into their 401k and they're being invested in cash, right? It's a funny thing with 401ks. People either pay way too much attention to their 401k and look at it obsessively, or they don't pay any attention to it at all. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so what was happening was 21-year-olds were putting their money into cash, and they had all this time that they were going to let it sit there in cash, and that's not smart. And then, of course, you also had people who were older and they were investing in the most aggressive and didn't realize that may not be the best idea. So target date funds were invented to take a young person from aggressive and as they got older, take them more conservative. It sounds like a fantastic idea. The theory makes sense that you just get more conservative as you get older. Well, unfortunately, there have been some studies done by them, and I'll provide a link to one of the studies that I referenced. I'm going to be referencing here, done by some different folks globally. And what they found was that target date funds, they don't beat a 50-50 index. In other words, if you just got 50% of the stock market and 50% of the bond market, you actually, over most Monte Carlo time periods, in other words, over most time frames of 40-year investment time frames, you don't do any better than just buying the index. And also, too, because there's no management to an index fund, they're inexpensive to do an index fund, and it's expensive to do a target date fund by comparison. Mm. And then finally, to add sort of salt to the wounds, they discovered that if they did the reverse, in other words, if a 21-year-old invested primarily in fixed income and then got aggressive as they got older, that strategy actually beat the target date strategy. Yeah. I mean, it was almost comical that what we were doing in target date funds was exactly the opposite. Again, this is based on Monte Carlo simulations. This is academics. We don't have a guarantee on future results based upon past performance, obviously. So there's three reasons right there from academics saying, look, target date funds don't make any sense. But let me add one that kind of, to me, is the most obvious, and that is that target date funds don't match the market and they don't match the investor.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's be honest here. I could be 25 years old. It doesn't mean I'm an aggressive person. I could be very, very susceptible to fear and to stress when I see 2008, 2009 happen. And I don't care how much I listen to Ray's podcast. He talks about buying the stock market. It's half off, because it's, down, and that's great for a young person, because emotion and risk tolerance and investor psychology have nothing to do with my age, right? And also, too, I've met several, in fact, just recently, I've talked with several retirees even, where they're living off their RMDs and pensions and Social Security, and they're doing just fine. And their assets really are their kids. So when they invest their money, they're really not looking at it from a day-to-day standpoint. And it's really refreshing to meet with those folks. And so they are relatively aggressive, 65 to 75 years old, and they're more than happy to be really heavy in equities because they're looking at their 40-year-old kids as the inheritors. So the idea that we should just have this glide path of equities to fixed income, to go from aggressive to conservative, is silly based upon market actions and based upon investor psyche. And so it doesn't make sense to me. And that, to me, is the nail in the coffin. So what do you do then? What you do is you call your advisor and you ask your advisor for advice on how to invest in your 401k. And if your advisor is a fiduciary, they are able to do that. They are able to provide you with that advice. And considering that this is where most people outside of their home, this is their biggest nest egg, it makes sense. So a pitfall is target date funds. And if that makes any sense, give me a call if you'd like that advice. That's a service that we provide as well, and we can point you in the right direction. So,
all right.
Another pitfall would be the person I talked about before. I said, there's two different types of mentalities. One is to kind of forget you have a 401k, and the other person is people who go in there and look at 401ks as something they need to manage on a paycheck by paycheck basis, a month by month basis. And those are the people who are trying to beat the market. Okay. So when you look at your 401k, one of the things that's a problem with 401ks is they can't provide you with every investment out there. So you're going to have 10 or 12 investments, right? And when you log into your 401k information, you're going to see the performance of your 401k. And you're going to see the performance of all of the options that you have over 1, 3, 5, and 10-year periods. What I see too often as a big pitfall is people will look at those investments and say, hey, I see that XYZ mutual fund is really crushing it, right? And so what do? They put an oversized allocation towards whatever mutual fund of the day is doing really well. Yeah. Well, you can imagine how that goes, right? It's like driving your car looking in your rear view. You're looking at past performance, and you're also not understanding the fact that if something has gone up, there's a good chance it could revert to the mean, and you're actually late to the party. And typically you're not. Typically, you get onto the bandwagon, and it feels fantastic for a while. And what ends up happening is people get onto the bandwagon, they have some early gains, things are going well, cycles reverse, and they give up those gains, or a good portion of them, and get onto the next bandwagon and switch. That's not a strategy. That is just allowing your emotions of fear and greed to make your decisions for you. The pitfall is trying to beat the market. The way to get around that is having a strategy. Having a strategy that's based upon mechanical rules, based upon asset allocation principles, based upon modern portfolio theory, based upon, as I've mentioned before, investing like you drive your car, using technical indicators as a guide to help you know when to be risk on and when to be risk off. That's a big difference than, hey, this one did really well these last 3 months. Let's pick this mutual fund. And I come across that a lot. And that's a pitfall you got to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, what I also do is the other extreme is that I have people where I feel like I call them abandoned 401ks. And abandoned 401ks are where people do one of two things. Number one, a lot of times what will happen is people will work at a place and they'll get a 401k going and they'll move to a new job and they'll leave their 401k behind. The problem that I have with that is there's an out of sight, out of mind mentality. And it seems like people fit into two camps. One is where they're looking at it too much and the other is where they forget about it. If you abandon your 401k at a previous job, the chances, in my experience, this is completely anecdotal, my experience is that you are more likely to become disconnected with it, not paying attention to it, not rebalancing it, doing all the things that you're supposed to do. The better idea would be to take that 401k and either roll it into your 401k at your current employer or roll it into an IRA, depending on what you and your advisor talk about and the pros and the cons of diversification and access and those type of things. So abandoning your 401k either by leaving it behind when you go to a new job, or also too, I see oftentimes people will, again, they'll get into those target date funds and they'll just continually invest in the target date fund and they'll never really have another question about it and just keep on keeping on, and they don't pay attention to it. And that's not the worst thing in the world, okay? But what I'm saying is that academics have shown that there are better things that we could be doing in terms of what to invest in. And then, of course, too, you got to make sure that your investments match not just you as an investor, but match the market as it is right now, so that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing based upon what the economy is in and what kind of cycles that we're in. So paying attention to your 401k and not abandoning it is a big thing. Where I find I fit in all this is most people, what they need is they need a coach. They need an accountability partner. And so your financial advisor needs to make sure that your 401k is part of your overall plan, that they are taking a look at it, that you are updating your 401k information with them either annually or semi-annually. What we do here is we encourage our clients who are employees and employee sponsor plan to use some software where we're able to actually see their 401k. We can't make any changes to it. We can only view it. And we're able to see that on a daily basis. So if the market has closed, the next day we see exactly where they are. That way, when we have conversations, it's all in real time, and the advice that we're giving them is right up to the minute. And it's a one way to make sure that you're avoiding those pitfalls of abandoning your 401k and letting it kind of atrophy due to neglect. So the pro tips are turn those incomes into assets, get that match, and use the Roth. The pitfalls would be avoid the target date funds. Instead, look for having a strategy. Also, a pitfall to avoid is don't try to beat the market. And again, go back to having a strategy instead. And then finally, a pitfall to avoid is don't abandon your 401ks. Make sure that you pay attention to it and get a coach to help you, an accountability partner to keep all eyes on it and all hands on deck.
All right, Ray, that's fantastic. And I know we're short on time, but I do have one quick follow-up question. Let's say somebody started working for a company back when they were 21, 22 years old, and they worked for them for a few years, and they signed up for a 401k just because, the people advised it, and they sat in this room and they got some knowledge and they signed up for it, but then completely forgot about it as they, maybe they got to college and they started working someplace else and so on and so forth. 20, 30 years goes by. How do you know if you've got one out there? How can you find out if you've got a 401k that you've abandoned?
Great question, Eric. The number one thing that you can do is go back to the employer and find out who their 401k provider is if you don't remember. Mm-hmm. If you know who the 401k provider is, you can find their 1-800 number, and they're more than happy to get you back in touch with your money. They'll need things like your social security number and some identifying information. If you find yourself at a dead end there's also a long shot, and that is to go to the Division of Unclaimed Property for your state. You can go there typically, again, online. For Floridians, it's fltreasurehunt.gov, and you can put your name in and see if there are any funds that the state is aware of that may have your name on it.
Nice. And that'd be nice to be able to find something like that.
Yeah.
All right, Ray, thank you so much for your time. This was great. And of course, anybody who's listening, if you have these questions, contact Ray and his team, and he'll be happy to meet with you. Again, thanks for listening today to the Return on Lifestyle podcast with Rey Descalso. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe button below. This way, when Ray comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Privada Wealth Management, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Return on Lifestyle podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Privada Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider for any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. The following program is sponsored by Privada Wealth Management, which is solely responsible for its content. Advisory services offered through J.W. Cole Advisors Incorporated. Securities offered through J.W. Cole Financial Incorporated. Member IFNRA, SIPC. Privada Wealth Management is an unaffiliated entity from J.W. Cole Advisors and J.W. Cole Financial. The opinions expressed by Rey Descalso should not be construed as specific investment, legal, or tax advice. All economic and performance information is historical and not indicative of future results. Investing may involve the risk of loss of principal. Any tax advice on this show is not intended to be used by any person for the purpose of avoiding U.S. federal or state tax penalties that may be imposed on such person, and each listener should seek advice from their tax advisor or legal counsel on topics that arise from the show. Nothing should be construed as solicitation of an offer to buy securities. The preceding program is sponsored by Privada Wealth Management, which is solely responsible for its content.